Folks. Welcome to the Future of Faith podcast. I'm Josh Packard, the co-founder of Future of Faith.
I'm Keedren Boston, ministry practitioner here at Future of Faith.
In each episode of this podcast, we're going to break down one key research finding from our brand new study about listening and faith formation. I'll give you the national perspective, trends and insights.
I'll take Josh's big fancy data and make it, useful. Spoiler alert. Not everything works, but I'll keep it real with how it actually plays out in ministry.
That's right. We believe listening isn't just a skill, it's a sacred tool.
So let's talk about what happens when listening leads the way.
This is the Future of Faith. Hey folks, welcome back to the Future of Faith podcast. I'm Josh Packard, co-founder of Future of Faith, and I'm here with Keedren Boston, ministry practitioner.
Hey.
Keedren, we've been talking all about this new study that we've just done about the intersection of listening and faith formation. It's not just that listening is a pathway to then get to do the things that you've traditionally done and how to be more effective, although it probably would be. It's that the actual act of listening itself can be one of these really, I would say, underutilized tools that in a minister's tool belt. That it's not that this leads to faith formation. It's that listening is faith formation. And we've been exploring that explicit intersection now for a couple of episodes. But one of the things I've heard you talk about before that I would love for this audience to hear is this idea of time, trust, and truth, and how those variables fit together. So could you take a minute and just sort of, explain that? Because obviously the thing that we're hoping for, the thing that we all want if we're working in ministry is truth. Like we want people to not just hear it, not just to be told it, but to hear it, internalize it, and have it change, their life in some way. But you have a unique take on this, I think.
Yeah, man. No, I appreciate that, Josh. You're absolutely right, man. When we spend time with people, right, it builds trust, right? We can't just think just because, well, let me put it like this. Sometimes we feel like since we have this truth, right, we want people, of course, we want to spread it. We want to tell the truth. We want other people to know the truth. The truth is absolute, right? It's not relevant. I want you all to know, right? What the truth is. But just because we have knowledge, we have the truth, does not mean that people want to spend time listening to it, especially if we haven't spent time with them. And so it's important for us to spend time with people to build trust. Mm-hmm. I heard it said that trust is built in, it's built in,
it's the trust is drops and lost.
Drops and not, yeah. Right. And so when it comes to that, one piece at a time, one moment at a time, over time builds trust. We have to carve out that time, and then our truth will matter, right? Because our time is our life. And if I feel like somebody has taken time out of their life, listen to me to build trust, now what their truth is, I'm more inclined to hear that because they spent time with me and we built that trust. So, yeah.
So along with the quantitative data that we've been talking about, we did a bunch of interviews with people, and that what you're saying there reminds me of this conversation with Stephanie. She's 39. To give some context here, and she says, "It makes me feel valued when somebody takes the time to really make eye contact and listen and nod and engage. When I feel like they're engaged, that builds trust." Yeah. And I know trust isn't the thing that we're like, we're going to talk more about trust later on as like, okay, well, what is the role here? But your point about like where trust comes in this model, like you're right. We did sort of think like, oh, if we have the truth and if we can convince them that we have the truth, then they'll trust us and they'll want to spend time with us. But you're suggesting it sort of is like the other way around.
It's the other way around. And Jesus did the same thing, right? Yeah. He spent time with the disciples, and he ate with them. He prayed with them. He taught them all those different things. He listened to them. He would ask them questions. Who do you say I am? Right? He wanted to know what they thought too. And then over that time, he built trust with them, so much so that even when he went back, right, even when he ascended back to heaven, they lived their lives to the point of death, right, because of the truth that he told, right? That's how much his truth meant to them because of the time and the trust that they built. You know what I mean? I mean, of course, he's Jesus, right? But
Just be Jesus. What?
right. But if we think about that, like the time he spent time with them, he built trust, and then the truth that he came to share and to live out, right? That hit different. That mattered so much.
Yeah.
We're here today talking about the same thing thousands of years later, you know.
Yeah.
And so that,
And you've worked in education settings too, Keedren. I think that like this took me a long time when I was a professor to try to really wrap my head around. And I had a really fantastic undergraduate education at Texas Lutheran University, small private liberal arts university. And like, look, TLU is not like cracking the top 100 of any rankings. Okay, this is not like the place where Supreme Court justices are born or anything like that. But the way of doing education there, which is very didactic, it's a lot of the Socratic method and people, small seminar classes of people asking questions of you, which I would never have the tolerance for. Listen, like if I were a 35-year-old philosophy professor or a 45 whatever year old philosophy professor listening to 18-year-olds talking about Plato, I mean, come on, like, God, this is not for me. Like, thank God those professors did, because I learned a lot. And then I went to get graduate school at Vanderbilt.
yeah,
That was a whole different situation, right? Like that was large lecture halls and people talking and students listening.
yeah.
And they weren't even always, I mean, even for some of the smaller classes, it was not like it's a big state school, but a lot of people have had that experience and they think that's what teaching is. They think teaching is me telling you something. But we know all the research tell that it's like, that is pedagogically, it's terrible.
For sure.
People don't retain that information very well. They don't grasp it. They don't comprehend it very well, and they don't retain it for very long.
That's true. Yeah, we should not have to achieve first before we feel like we belong.
Yeah.
And a lot of times belonging, when I do something well, right, now I feel like now I'm accepted, and that's not the way that it should be. But I tell you what, man, this is a big deal. And over the last, I don't know, definitely 6 or 7 years for me, spending time listening to youth and adults has been some of the most fruitful years of my life, learning about people, listening to them, learning their stories, and being able to affirm and confirm things that they share. And I think that's been a big deal. It's been a blessing to me, but also like even just the I guess I'll say the testimonies, of what they have shared. Like, man, like I needed to just get this off my chest. I needed someone to know what I was thinking,
Yeah.
And so
When you do that though, is it like hard to like to not, because you're working with young people will tell you some very alarming things if you listen to them. I don't, you have to tell them, you don't have to listen for very long. They'll just, out with it. But there's like, okay, so here's what I've got in my head is that my friend Jeff Neal is the executive director of our local Youth for Christ chapter. I think they do some really innovative things. I may very well reference them again throughout the podcast, but for a long time, he said, my whole approach to ministry and to what the culture that we're trying to do with our staff here is that we want the kids to spend time around us so that they begin to understand that a life lived with Christ is better than the life they're living now. Like we can't tell them that because we know they won't hear it. Right.
Right. Yeah.
But if we can do things that make them want to be around us, so that we get to demonstrate that on a daily basis, this is the time, time first. Right.
Yeah. Sure.
He's like, that's the thing. He's like, we believe in what we're saying. So we know we don't have to say it. The other thing he says is we're going to shout love so we can whisper the gospel. I mean, these are great, like, these are like, this is a great approach, but I think that's a lot of what you're talking about is like sitting and listening. But man, in the process, and I asked Jeff about this, I was like, in the process of like trying to convince them that this is a better life, like that means that like that's going to take a while. And in the intermediary, they're going to tell you, and they work with a lot of troubled youth, like they're going to tell you about some crazy things that they're thinking about doing, drugs, gangs, how they're, fights, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And obviously when it's a safety issue, they'll step in, but a lot of the rest of it is patience. How do you deal with that? Like when you're like, okay, I'm committed to listening, and then you're across from a 15-year-old who tells you like, yeah, I'm thinking about, I don't know, I'm going to date this person, or like, I'm going to spend all my money on these speakers for my car or something. Yeah. It doesn't always have to be heavy moral issues, but like, what do you do that?
Man, for one, a lot of prayer.
Okay, yeah, sure.
There
were people who say that we believe in prayer, then getting that stuff so you know what to pray about is critical, right?
It is, and even in the moments when I'm hearing it, just to be transparent, I'm praying like, Lord, like, I'm listening, but also give me what to say in these moments if I need to say anything, or do I need to just soak this up and listen and come back, but I'm definitely very, very prayerful in those ways. But also, and I feel like I have, there's the grace to do this as well too. And grace gives us the capacity to take on things that we're called to do, and so I'm legitimately interested. I mean, we'll talk about this later on, in a later episode, but I'm curious about it because I'm passionate about what I get to do. And I really want to see them win right now. I want to see them prosper even as their soul prospers, and so being able to, I think it's a great compliment. So if youth, especially youth, come in to talk to you and telling you hard things, take that as a compliment. I know sometimes as an adult, we could be, that's crazy that you said that to me. Right. Right. And sometimes we may be the last to find out, right? It's a blessing that we're getting to know, because it ain't like all their friends may already know what's going on. All their friends may already know what they're getting into and what they struggle with. But the fact that we get to know and they tell us, that's a compliment. And so, being very prayerful with how we handle that information. We never, when it comes to partnering with parents, when it comes to this type of stuff, I always let students know, like, I'm not here. It's not me versus your parents. Right. Me and you versus your parents. It's not me and your parents versus you. I am here to reinforce what's happening at the home. And if I know that that's not happening at the home, then I'm definitely here to reinforce what's happening in God's word, but for them not to dishonor their parents, because sometimes honoring your parents is just not dishonoring your parents, right? That's the least that you could do, is to not.
Wait, I'm gonna make
honor.
Listen to this part of it. Sure.
Yeah. So yeah, we had one of our friends, she shared that sentiment. Like, sometimes honoring my parent is not dishonoring them. And so at the least, it's like, I'm not going to help you dishonor your parent. Just pray and seek God in that way. So that's really how I handle that. It's really a mission. And that also helps them, to Jeff's point, like, seeing how we handle things and how we walk it out. Like, we're a walking testimony for them. Because there's so much stuff to talk about on a Sunday, so many messages. We're not going to cover everything. And that's in youth ministry. That's in, with the adults. You're not going to be able to cover everyone in the room, right? But I always remind students too, whatever you're learning today, you may not be struggling with this, but this is something that you can take to help someone else, or you may need this one day. So stay locked in that way. But that kind of stuff matters and sticks to them because of the time that we spent with them, the trust that we have built. And it's not just me. I'm developing leaders to do the same thing. It's not about me, right? It's about us developing leaders that can do that can reach more people, whether it's in the youth spaces, the adult spaces, young adult, whatever that is, senior spaces.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, you're really building a culture of listening as ministry.
Yes.
Which is, I mean, I think this is so critical. It gets to this issue of like, how do we scale this beyond, how many cups of coffee can you have in 1 week? Like, well, you can only have so many, but the way you scale this is by reaching out to others. So we interviewed Alexandria. I mentioned that we do, I mentioned a quote from earlier. Alexandria, 24 years old, Black woman. She says, if I know they listen to me, then the very least I can be able to do is to reciprocate that. And like, that's like, we're all looking for that kind of influence in people's lives if we're in ministry, right? Like, especially for kids. But I think that's it was like, oh, like, we start to see some of these data emerge that like listening begets listening.
For sure.
And it can be such a critical thing. I'm not going to kill people with data. One last point here, though. 85% of adults and about the same number of young people in our survey said that listening was critical in the moments that helped shape their faith the most. Listening was critical in the moments that helped shape their faith the most. So, not only are you doing this thing when you sit and spend time with people, but like where you're getting, to Alexandria's point, we're like, oh yeah, okay, if you're listening to me, I'll listen to you.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also like at the same time, you're also potentially taking part in maybe one of the most critical faith formation activities that they'll engage in.
Man, that's good. And that's what I love about data, man. It gives us insight, helps us to ask better questions, but also not assume what's happening or what we're doing is as impactful as we might think it is. And it's another way to listen.
It's another way to listen, right?
Yeah.
And I think one of the things I appreciate so much about having, you on this podcast, like, so it's one, like, of course, like I've been doing this kind of research now for 10, 15 years. Like I see all the national studies that come out. I don't like know them by heart, but I'm pretty well aware of the trends, but none of that matters if you can't figure out what to do with it, right? Like I've never been in ministry and it's like, okay, well, if I know, X percentage of people are walking away from the church, well, what does that mean for an actual like pastor who's, trying to lead a particular congregation? And part of what, I think that these lessons that you're bringing out so much, that are so valuable rather, is because like we're learning how you interpret some of these data and how some of these trends in your own congregation. Other people may choose to do some of the things that you're doing, but mostly it's that, like, I think you see a model here for like, all right, one congregation, one minister filtering all this information and trying to then engage with it faithfully. How we can really make some programmatic, culture changes in our own churches.
No, for sure. Yeah, man. And thank you for doing this, you and your team, everyone who does this, because it really helps us to see sometimes they're blind spots. Sometimes there are things that, oh man, I didn't know. Let me look at that in my space.
Yeah.
Let me lean in to that point in my space, because if we're doing this if they've done this national survey and, this is what it's saying, let me survey my land.
And I think this is where this is weird for me as a researcher, where it's like, on the one hand, like, yeah, I'm going to do all this research so we can begin to try and understand like what's a trend and what's a one-off and blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, like, I don't think anybody should build a ministry around a survey.
Right.
Especially not a national one when you have a particular congregation or a youth group or a small group ministry or a campus or whatever. Like, and I'm not even saying that you should go and give an actual multiple choice question survey to your own congregation. What I mean, what I think you're saying is, let me survey in the broad sense. Let me understand my people with that lens of like, is that happening here? And if so, to what extent, and what does it look like? What does it mean for us? Like you said, these become points of departure or conversation. So in some ways, like, I'm the researcher telling everybody like, but slow down. Like, let's take our research with a grain of salt.
That's wisdom. That's wisdom, man. But also, it's definitely a cue for us to listen and to lean in, because what we both do matters, right? It goes hand in hand, because we are, a lot of times, we're locked into our silos, because we are, depending on the demographic, depending on our community and what our community needs, we handle things, the way we feel we should to cater to that community. But it's important to be able to see, okay, let me just check in on my people in that point. I didn't think about that.
Yeah. I like that. It's I didn't, it gives you a new way of putting the, you might see some of this stuff, but maybe not have arranged it in a particular way or connected those dots. Okay. Well, look, this has been great, Keedren. So we've spent 2 episodes now talking about the exact intersection here between faith formation and listening. Big takeaways, is that you're not doing nothing when you sit and listen. You're actually participating in some critical work that can help build some influence for you for the future as a minister. But also, at the same time, the act of letting somebody talk something out and you listening and paying attention to it and honoring that stuff, that in and of itself also is a viable and important pathway towards deepening somebody's faith. So this has been awesome. We've got now, Keedren, we're going to jump into some sections about exactly how you should listen. So the research here is pretty enlightening about like some of the key things to do. And then we'll also have a bonus episode about what not to do in this middle section of the podcast season coming up.
Excited about it.
All right, everybody. See you soon.
You have been listening to the Future of Faith podcast, produced by Future of Faith with original music by me, Keedren Boston. You can learn more about the Sacred Listening Study and all the amazing things going on in relational ministry at www.futureoffaith.org. And don't forget to sign up for our newsletter, where we feature incredible ministries, sacred listeners, and cutting-edge research, all for free, delivered right to your inbox. Thanks for listening. This is the Future of Faith.